Hi, I'm Jeff Gerard, president of the Concrete Countertop Institute, and I'd like to talk to you about the AIR-658 air polisher. I think this is one of the more important tools, and certainly one of the better tools that you can choose to put in your toolbox, because anybody who does light grinding and honing to create a salt and pepper look, or even polishing, is going to be using some sort of polisher to run their diamond pads. And an air polisher is a much superior tool over an electric polisher. Certainly if you've ever tried to do edges and you've had an electric polisher get wet and it shorts out or it shocks you, that's inconvenient and slows you down. You have to wait for the electric polisher to dry out. And then there are the brushes that wear out and things like that. Well, an air polisher, because it runs off air, there's no electricity, so there's no chance of being shocked. And using an air polisher on edges is very easy because it's such a small and light and maneuverable tool. This is a precision tool, it's very powerful, but it's all about control. And when you're finishing the surface of your concrete, the quality of the surface is entirely dependent on how much skill you have and how much control you exert over the head, so it doesn't tip or gouge the surface. Well, an air tool, or specifically an air polisher, is so small and controllable, you literally can have all this power and control in the palm of your hand. You can either use it one-handed like this, or two-handed in this way, where you can control the airspeed and the water control with one hand, and the tool itself. It's very easy to keep flat. It stays flat on its own. Now, air polishers are just like electric polishers in that they have a standard spindle, so it still uses the same spindle, so all your backers that you've already invested in will still work. It's a 5/8 11 thread. Because the air polisher is small, it doesn't have a spindle lock, but the wrench that it comes with is very easy to use. I mean, it doesn't really take that much effort to use it, so it's, you know, you're not fighting this giant metal bond turbo cup where you have to use two wrenches to get it off. Lightness, power, and control are everything that makes an air polisher a superior tool to invest in, because you're really investing in this sort of tool. And I'm really big up on the Alpha brand, and it's not because I sell it because I think it's the best air polisher on the market. And I only sell and recommend tools that I think are the best quality tools that you can invest in. It's certainly one of the more expensive ones. I'd rather spend a little bit more money and be pleased with the tool that lasts a long, long time than to save 50, 60, 70 bucks and regret wasting money on a tool that really never performs right out of the box. This is my personal polisher. I've had it for over 7 years. It's done thousands of square feet of concrete in a production shop, and it's gone through the hands of every single one of my students. It still works exactly the same as it did the day I took it out of the box. It doesn't look the same. It's got a few battle scars here and there, but I've never had to replace anything. This blue sleeve is finally worn down. It normally is about 1 meter long, and its job is to protect the hoses from abrasion, and it also directs the exhaust, the air exhaust out the back, and so you have the air coming out further away from you. I've never bothered to replace it. It's perfectly acceptable as it is. I usually have all my hoses hanging above me so they're not draped and catching on the edge of my work. So I'm not too concerned about wear on the hoses because they really don't drag on the edges of the concrete. So this air polisher can use a standard 5-inch rigid backer that I have here. It can use a flexible backer. It could use 3-inch, 4-inch. It can use a small 4.5-inch turbo cup to do some light grinding. It is powerful enough for that, and it can run a profile wheel. The only tooling it has troubles with are the big 7-inch pads, and I would never ever use a 5 or 6-inch turbo cup on this. It's just too, the gearbox isn't robust enough for that. But certainly a small 4-inch where you're grinding the edges of a GFRC, the excess on top of the forms. If you do GFRC, you know what I mean by grinding off the excess GFRC before you strip your forms. When I talk about later on in another video about larger electric polishers, and I talk about the Flex 603 VR, that can handle larger turbo cups, can handle 7-inch pads. That's where it's suited. That's what it's suited for. This tool will do 80 to 90% of everything you want to do, and it does it reliably, with a lot of control, a lot more control than the equivalent electric tool. So if you have one, or if you've ever seen an electric 4 or 5-inch polisher, they're about that big, and they're about that big around. So they're just an angle grinder size. They weigh about twice as much, 5-6 pounds. This is a little over 2.5 pounds. So it's a much smaller tool, a lot more compact, a lot more control, and that's everything what an air polisher is all about. So this can do everything you want without electrical shocks, without shorting out, without having your brushes wear out, or all the crud, the cuttings that get inside the motor that wear it out, that eventually make an electric polisher, its lifespan is probably 3 to 5 years if you're lucky. I usually get about 4 or 5 years out of a polisher before I have to either start tearing it down and replacing parts, or physically replacing this. You're looking at 7 years of hard use. I probably should be able to get another 7, maybe 10 more years out of this. So dollar for dollar, it's well worth investing in a good tool. Buy the right tool once, and you only cry that when you sign the check. Buy a cheap tool, you're going to cry every single time you use it. And I'll have a little bit more to say on that. Now, air tools, what you're seeing here is just the air tool, but the part that feeds the air is just as important. And it's one of the main series of questions I get about air tools is, what size air compressor do I need? And you really do need to pay attention to the specs, to pay attention to what I talk about, because the tool just won't work on a smaller compressor. It'll spin in the air and it'll make noise, but it's not going to work the way you expect it. These tools need a lot of air, so they run at 90 psi. That's about 6.2 bar in metric speak. But the air consumption of this tool is quite high, 15 cubic feet per minute. I like to say if your air compressor should put out 16 cubic feet per minute, or 450 liters per minute. That's a lot of air. That needs a big air compressor. Typically that's a 5 horsepower, 2-stage air compressor that's pumping out a steady 16 cubic feet at 90 psi steady. Doesn't matter how big the tank is, that pump is running constantly. That's what these tools need. Now that's a lot of money. A big air compressor's probably going to run $1,000 or more. If you're serious about doing this as a business, that's a relatively small investment. That same air compressor is going to run your hopper gun. It's going to run your backer sprayer gun. It's going to run your air spray gun, your HVLP for spraying sealer. It's going to run air tools. It's also going to run your air polisher. So your air polisher dictates the size of your air compressor, but a big air compressor is again a tool you don't just buy and throw away in a couple of years. It's going to last 10, 15, 20 years if you take care of it. So these are investment tools that are the core of your business. Certainly if you're a hobbyist, I wouldn't recommend it, but you're probably not listening to me if you're just a hobbyist. If you're serious about doing this, you're listening to me and you're really interested in investing your hard-earned money in the right tool, and the AIR-658 is the right tool for air polishers. Now, what other polishers have I used? I've used cheap Chinese ones that don't really have a brand name. Sometimes the handles are orange, sometimes they're bright blue, sometimes they're green, sometimes they're black. Oftentimes they have air vents that are on the side, and you don't want that because air coming out the side is going to blow air on your hands, and air coming out of this polisher is cold, so your fingers are going to freeze. Plus, any kind of oil or moisture is going to get spit out on your concrete, where it's going to really stain and contaminate your concrete. You don't want that to happen. When it comes out the back here, it doesn't get on the concrete. I've never ever seen that. So it's not really an issue, even when my sleeve is cut short like this. Okay. The Alpha, when it comes out of the box, has a side handle. Now, a side handle is not really that great. I don't use it. Obviously, I don't have one on here, but if you had a side handle, it tends to cause some twisting. A better configuration would be a D handle. Now, there are air polishers, other brands that come with a D handle, and they're touted as being superior to a side handle, and that's true. But I don't have a D handle on this, I don't need one. It's such a light tool, it's self-balancing. You know, a D handle is there to compensate for a big, heavy motor. Well, this doesn't have a big, heavy motor. It's stable on its own, so the presence of a D handle is unnecessary. Even if I had one, I wouldn't put it on there, because I like to hold it either with one hand like this, or with two hands where this controls the head, and this hand controls my water feed and my air. So there's no need, I have all the control I want. This is not going to fall over just because I let go. Let me show you a big electric polisher that does have a D handle and why it's important when you have a much bigger polisher. This is the Flex 603 VR. It's a large 5-inch electric polisher with variable speed, and it does have a D handle. Now, a D handle on this size polisher is absolutely necessary. I would never ever consider a side handle, which would be mounted right here. D handles are very important on a big polisher that has this large, heavy motor. This polisher weighs perhaps 3 times as much as my air polisher. And just for comparison, look at the difference in size. Now, I'm not going to pretend to say these are equivalent. This is much more powerful. Look at the size of the gearbox. This can run a 7-inch polishing head, whether it's a 7-inch 50 grit pad or a 5-inch or even a 6-inch metal bond turbo cup. This polisher is powerful enough and robust enough to do it, and you have to have a D handle for that, because basically you're holding all the weight here, and it's all there to keep this motor from tipping back. Not necessary on an air polisher, so don't discount the Alpha because it doesn't have a D handle. It's unnecessary, it just gets in your way, you won't even need to put it on. So the way I have mine is probably the way you're going to end up using yours. I put this little pink masonry twine on it, and that's how I hang it up. So I have a hook in my wet processing area so I can hook this up, and that way it's not going to fall on the floor and break, and if I plug it in to the air and it's going, it's not going to spin off and dig a gouge in the concrete or fall onto the floor and break. So that's a nice little modification I did. Probably the only thing you have to do to modify your tool. The other polisher that's popular on the market, and it's popular because Flex is a very well-known brand that's distributed by everybody, basically. Flex makes excellent electric polishers, and the 603 VR that I just showed you, I consider a wonderful electric polisher capable of, heavy-duty grinding that's going to last for years. However, I don't think the Flex air polisher is a very good tool. The Flex 923 pneumatic or air polisher, which is red, it looks a lot like this, is an inferior tool. Costs about $275, whereas this is $362. Do the math, that's about another $90 more. So this is a significant amount of money more than the Flex. However, this is 7 years old, and I've never had to do anything to it. It's always worked. Whereas a few years ago, in one summer of not very heavy-duty use, I broke 2 Flex air polishers of the same model, and I had to cobble them together to make them work. And what I found was, even when they were brand new, even when they were working as best as they could, they didn't spin up as fast as this, they didn't hold the power, they didn't have as much torque as this because the gearing's different. They didn't spit out as much water, and when I took it apart, I found that the water feed, instead of being machine cut, was just a brass tube crimped with wire cutters. So there was barely any water coming out. And to me, that was a sign of shoddy craftsmanship, shoddy manufacture, where they just slapped it together and did it as fast as possible, and that way they could sell a cheaper tool. Yes, it is an air polisher. Yes, the Flex will run. But is it as good as this? Will it last as long as this? Absolutely not. Don't waste your money. Buy this one. You're never going to notice spending $90 more in 5 years, in 10 years. You will notice trying to save $90 the first or second time you go to use the Flex. This is a much better polisher, bar none. I've used both and I will come back to this every single time. I'm not here to sell every brand of everything under the sun. I'm also not here to try to make a ton of money on stuff. I'm a trainer, I'm an educator. I'm offering the best quality tools so that people can trust that the tool they're investing in, or the materials they're investing in, are the ones that are right for them. So they don't have to worry about, is that tool going to do what I want? Is it going to last? You know, you can be penny wise and pound foolish. Well, this is where you want to be dollar smart. Spend your money wisely. And if it takes waiting a little longer to save up that extra $90 to buy this, then do so. Don't buy it right away, but definitely put this on the top of your list for the right tool to get. You only ever have to buy it once.